Welcome back to HPP, the podcast that covers college basketball and the NBA draft inside and out. I am Rich Harris, and thank you for joining us again. Today, I am joined by Cam Rielhl, who just got back from a camping trip. Cam, don't you know that God made hotels so we didn't have to go camping?
Yeah, no, Rich. Hotels made gods, or God made hotels so that you could, get, bed bugs, lice, etc. But be surprised when it happens. That's what camping's for. I'm willing to risk it.
I think you're thinking of motels there, not hotels. And God made motels because we really aren't meant to be married. So, all right. So before today's show is going to be all about almost all about the previewing the Southeastern Conference. But before we do, we're going to have a little NBA notebook and with just one topic, because we haven't been talking much about pro basketball lately. And we're going to talk about the trade where the Sixers sent James Harden to the Clippers. And so, Cam, I guess I'll review what happened in the trade. Clippers received Harden, PJ Tucker, and Filip Pokusevski, who they then flipped immediately to Sacramento for the draft rights to somebody I didn't recognize his name, some European player. And the Sixers got Marcus Morris, Nicholas Batum, Robert Covington, Kenyon Martin, 2 first-rounders, 1 first-round pick swap, and 2 second-rounders. And the pick swap, the only way that won't go through is if it lands on a top 3 pick. So the odds are pretty good that they will end up with that pick swap. So what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Rich, you're the Sixers fan. I want to start out with, how do you feel? How you feeling? It's been a saga.
I'm elated. I don't think there's one player that they sent away that was going to help them win this year or in the future, to be honest. Now, I think Covington and Batum could be helpful this year to some degree. I think Kenyon Martin could definitely be a help. Not just this year, but down the road. And then you get all the draft capital, which you can either keep or you can maybe, turn around and package, to get somebody else, another piece. So I think, the one thing the Sixers are now lacking is they really don't have a great option as a backup shooting guard. So Melton and Beverly, I think, can hold down the point, and Maxey too. Maxey can play the point. But, right now, Melton and Maxey starting, I think is fine. But I would like to see somebody other than Beverly who can shoot to come off the bench to play a guard. I think otherwise, they've greatly enhanced their depth. Kelly Oubre's playing great. Embiid's playing well. Maxey's playing superb. I'm glad to get rid of PJ Tucker because there's still 1 more year left on that contract. Harden said he's talked a lot of shit since he's left. And even Embiid's like, what is he talking about? Harden said things like, that he was hindered by the Sixers. And Embiid's response basically was, what are you talking about? You had the ball every time we came down the court. How were you hindered? So yeah, one thing I'm a little concerned about, but I think this is very minor, is Batum has yet to show up. At least the latest I heard, he had yet to show up for the team. So I don't know if he's upset that he was traded. They're calling it personal reasons. But I don't think that's a huge deal. It's nice to have Covington back. I never wanted him to go in the first place. Marcus Morris is a Philly guy originally. So yeah, I don't know. The thing to me is, what the hell did the Clippers gain? I mean, really, what did the Clippers get out of this? I can't. I would never, if I'm a GM, I never give up all those picks for Harden.
Oh, seriously. I mean, you gotta yeah, just looking purely on paper, the amount of talent that they have on that team, it's impressive. I mean, you're talking
Yeah,
about
but
two
everybody's
former
over 30 years
MVPs.
old.
No, exactly. But I think this trade in particular feels like, and it sounds like, especially from the Sixers side, the thing that finally kind of pushed it through was ownership sort of stepping in, being like, okay, let's just, let's get a deal done. Um, but I think really it shows like that Ballmer doesn't want to, sort of risk having a underperforming team coming into their new arena, in LA. And I think, being able to throw, three guys that have collected some form of MVP plus Paul George on a billboard and, say, it's our city, that's more valuable to them than I think maintaining, flexibility with their future. That team's just, they're so deeply all in to begin with Paul George and Kawhi. Like, there wasn't really a backup option for them moving off of those two guys if they did need to go towards a rebuild. And I mean, like, just looking at like the risk to like the value of that franchise if they did kind of squander, this superstar run. I think it's worth it for the Clippers to say, hey, let's bring in another high talent former all-star. Yeah, I know. Personally, like, for the Sixers, I feel like it's about as good as they could have done, but I really would have wanted to bring in a guy like Norm Powell. I feel like
Yeah,
Norm Powell would be the difference maker for me.
right. And they didn't want it. They didn't want to because they want everybody they brought in. They don't have to pay next year if they don't want to. They're all on expiring deals. They couldn't do that with Powell.
Yeah, but I still I question. I mean, the past few teams that we've seen really build through free agency, they haven't really panned out. And if you're already looking ahead at the free agent crop for this coming season, it's nothing really like mind blowing that you're like, oh, I can't wait to spend 30K or 30 mil on this dude. Like, I think it's a little bit pie in the sky for the Sixers to think that they're gonna massively upgrade their roster in free agency, especially since they're gonna have to pay Maxey. I mean, he's gonna take a chunk of that cap space that they have sitting there.
Right.
So, I mean, like, for the sort of build for the future model, I don't love it. Bringing in the picks is nice. I like KJ Martin. I think he's going to be a really nice complement to Embiid as a power forward option. Finally bring in somebody athletic next to, Embiid. I think that's a really good fit. Batum will eventually report. I imagine it's, when personal reasons get cited, there's kind of two situations, right? Like, one, it might be a flip sort of situation, like we saw with Petrosev already has been flipped from the Clippers. But he's going to the Kings. Like, there could be that kind of situation with Batum where maybe there's a competitive team that's like, we really like him. Let's bring him in before he gets comfortable in Philly. That's a possibility, but also too, like, these guys have lives. Like, they got families. They're finding houses, selling houses, so on.
Or finding apartments, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It could be kind of that situation. I wouldn't doubt it. But I think you got to think. I mean, like, the Sixers got better, not a whole lot better.
Right.
I think if anything, this
Right,
just kind of stabilizes them as a middle of the pack playoff team.
Yep. But I mean, how much have the Clippers gotten better? Because, you really, what you do is you displace Russell Westbrook with Harden. And, could Harden play any better than Westbrook did in last year's playoffs? Who played better in last year's playoffs, Westbrook or Harden?
Depends which game you're looking at. I mean, Harden had some really high highs and some pretty low lows.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a hard Clippers team to evaluate. They have been for the past 4 years, basically. So, you have to start off with health, obviously, with this team. I think the one thing that is encouraging to me is that you're finally going to get to see Kawhi and Paul George refocus a little bit on the defensive side of the ball,
Right.
which I think is a major plus. But at the same time, I mean, they're going to have to make up for, the relative weakness, saying it mildly, of James Harden's defense. Um,
And plus,
that's going to be a
Harden
major
isn't the Harden he
shift.
was. Harden isn't the Harden he was 5-6 years ago. You know?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, like the guy you're getting is gonna, ISO for sections of the game. He's basically back to playing six-man Harden. I think that's really like the real role that he should fill for this team is, when it's the bench unit, stagger him as much as you can with Kawhi PG, maybe more so play Norm Powell with those guys. But, deep bench unit, you're probably playing him alongside like Mason Plumlee. Um, like he's iso balling, mashing pick and roll. He gets his step back threes. And then when he is in with, the rest of the starters, he's playing a facilitator role, little drive and cut action. But I'm interested to see who ends up closing because if you don't have to close with James Harden, I feel like that's a bonus. Like his clutch numbers are not great. So, maybe he really is best set as, just instant offense off the bench and, supporting those lower scoring, bench units.
I've been saying for years he's all empty calories. So I never wanted him on the Sixers in the first place. So, what a nice tutor though for Bones Highland.
Oh God. I was just thinking about Bones. Like, God, just James Harden playing with Bones. He's gonna get so irritated. Like game one, Bones is gonna play like a Harden isolation off of a pick and roll, and Harden's just gonna be sitting there in the corner waiting for it, hands down.
Braiding his beard,
and he starts trotting up the court, even though it misses. I just like the peak of like what this Clippers rosters could be. Like it's enticing. I really like Zubac with this roster too. Like a guy that can set a ton of screens. He's gonna do all the dirty work, get rebounds for everybody, and I still really I love Westbrook. I think what he brings is, borderline starter, point guard, ton of assists, ton of rebounding. I love what he brings to the team, and I don't know, it's going to be interesting to see. I don't know how to evaluate them. I don't know if I feel like their floor is lower and their ceiling is a little higher. But the variance is just crazy with this team.
Well,
it will be.
Let's revisit our fearless forecast. And I'm not just talking about you and I'm talking about where collectively the nine of us put the Sixers finishing fourth in the East. Has that moved at all for you?
I still feel like, I mean, I was probably the lowest on the Sixers this year out of our forecasts. I had them as basically a borderline playoff team. I had them pretty low.
You had him fifth. You had him fifth. Somebody had him seventh. Nobody had him higher in fourth, but fourth was the most common number.
Yeah, I think fifth is still their number. I mean, even with the guys they brought in, like they kind of all fit into roles that they already have on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like you said,
I got to disagree with you there. I think Covington gives them a shooter that they didn't have it at the 3 or the 4. Batum, you could say, he could do a little bit of everything. He can even play point guard for you. So I don't know. I like their bench better, but I don't know if it's enough for me to say they're going to finish any higher than fourth.
Yeah, I just don't.
Right.
I feel like there are higher ceiling teams that have younger cores that are ready to take a leap. And then too, I mean, you've always got the, sort of looming threat of Embiid going down for a month. Add
Yeah.
that in there. I feel like fifth is pretty much their ceiling.
Right.
Where did we land on the Clippers
Well,
for our
that's what I was
forecast?
about to say. We had him seventh. Um, we had him seventh. I personally had them eighth, and you had them 11th. Wow,
I did, yeah.
you were stingy.
I I did not trust that roster, heading in. And start of the season, they're all healthy, they look pretty good, but where's the ceiling? Even now, I feel like they're still, they would be lucky, like very, very lucky. They would have to have a very healthy season to get into like the fifth, sixth range for me.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I would bump them up probably a little bit now, up to 5 or 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, too, like who do you kick down? Like Dallas looks good.
Well, we had Memphis 5th. Um,
Yeah.
I didn't like that. And we all, yeah. So,
Of course, we did the forecast not knowing that Steven Adams was going to miss the full season. I think that's a
a
big
lot of
component
people,
of it.
yeah. I think I was able to vote after that news, but just about everybody else
Yeah.
voted before that news.
I definitely would have had him lower if I'd known. But
Right.
yeah, I mean that's pretty clearly the next step up. But there's still some other teams down there in the pack that could pop up. Um, the Pelicans look really good right now. I feel like they were on the borderline in our previous forecast. So
yeah, and I think we all said, Pelicans could, be, 4th in this conference, or they could be 12th in this conference, and it all depended on what was going to shake out with their health. So we'll move on to our SEC preview, and before we jump into it, I will review what happened last season. So Alabama, much of the season they were ranked number 1 or close to it. They won the regular season title by just 1 game over Texas A&M. The 2 teams would meet in the SEC tourney. Bama prevailed pretty handily, 82-63, to earn the automatic bid into the NCAA tournament. A total of 8 SEC teams made the big dance. Alabama was a 1 seed. Tennessee was a 4. Kentucky a 6. A&M a 7. Mizzou a 7. Arkansas an 8. Auburn a 9. And Mississippi State 11. 3 would advance to the Sweet 16, but no further. They all stopped right there. Bama lost to San Diego State. Tennessee lost a close one to FAU. And Arkansas lost to UConn. 2 SEC teams made the NIT, and that was Florida and Vanderbilt. Florida lost in the first round to Central Florida, while Vandy would defeat Yale and Michigan before falling to the runner-up in the tournament, UAB. In terms of coaching changes, we only have 1, and that's Chris Beard replaces Kermit Davis at Ole Miss. I will say I'm not going to personally comment on the Chris Beard situation because I don't know enough about it. It looked bad at first, and then his fiance kind of recanted somewhat. But I know some people are upset that he got hired. But come on, SEC has a long reputation of looking the other way for all kinds of things. So I think in the scope of things, the things that the SEC has brushed under the rug, what Chris Beard did was kind of mild in comparison to some things. Not defending him, by the way, I'm just saying. All right, so leading off, we're going to talk about these teams in the order of finish, and that would be Alabama. And of course, they lost a ton last year. Brandon Miller, the freshman of the year and the player of the year, moves on to the NBA, 2nd overall pick. Noah Clowney moves on to the NBA. Javon Quinterly, the 6th man of the year in the conference, is now in Memphis. Charles Bediako, NBA. Jaden Bradley, transferred to Arizona. Noah Gurley, playing in Europe. Namari Burnett, transferred to Michigan. And Dom Welsh, He also is playing in Europe. So what that leaves him basically is 3 players who played significant minutes last year. Wing Ryan Griffith, good shooter. Mark Shears, point guard, good all-around, probably more of a shoot-first point guard than a playmaker. And then Nick Pringle, who gave them really nice minutes at the center position, basically. And now the newcomers, bunch of them. And I probably won't go over all of them. I'll just mention some of the more interesting ones. Topping the list is Grant Nelson, who tested the NBA waters last year, 6'10", 6'11" guy. And man, was he outstanding in the individual drills for athleticism. This guy is ultra athletic for a big. Also, Aaron Estrada, the 2-time player of the year in the CAA conference. Good guard, can do a little bit of everything, stat sheet stuffer at Hofstra. We shall see how that translates. They also bring in 4 freshmen. I believe all of them are 4 stars. And probably the most highly regarded is Jaron Stevenson. And I'm kind of confused because I had him on our draft board. I always track the recruiting rankings, and I initially had him at number 40. And now I don't know if I got that ranking before he reclassified, but this is a kid who reclassified. Now they have him at 106 in the composite rankings. But one of the things that occurred to me is those composite rankings, sometimes certain services just don't. Like a guy reclassifies, they're slow to catch up on that. So maybe somebody just didn't rank him, and that pulled his ranking way down. But I think Jaron Stevenson is generally regarded as the highest recruit coming in Alabama. And believe it or not, he's a lot like Noah Clowney, physically and in the way he plays. Another interesting guy is forward Sam Walters, number 57 in the composite rankings. They also have another top 100 guy, and Chris Parker, a wing, at number 99. So Cam, having said all that about Alabama, what do you think? What do you think of this team?
Ultimately, with so many guys, like, I feel like college basketball is so dependent on, having a returning core of some sort. I still look at this team as, a pretty solid contender to make March Madness, at the end of the season. But I don't look at them as sort of like the top tier program that they were last season. I love some of the transfers that they're bringing in with Grant Nelson and Aaron Estrada. Rich, I'm a huge Grant Nelson guy. I think, I was a little bit surprised to see him come back actually after his combine performance, looking at the NBA and, talking to teams around the league. Grant Nelson made the decision, hey, I'm going to come back to college, move up to a little bit more competitive division in the SEC. I think he's got a strong candidacy for player of the year in the SEC. It might take him some time to adjust to the physicality, coming
and
from North
speed.
Dakota State.
And the speed.
Yeah, speed as well. Yeah. But, just an absolutely lengthy, versatile player. Could he play some minutes at center? I wouldn't be shocked. I think he's probably his best fit is really kind of playing like a Giannis type role where, defensively he can kind of roam, but offensively he's got a little bit bigger guy to help him out on the rebounding aspect of the game. And the pair with Nelson too, you're bringing in Aaron Estrada. He's been around for a long time. He's over 20 points a game last year at Hofstra. Really just such a solid scoring presence. And a good passer. He's been around 5 assists per game past few years. That's going to help. Like bringing in some really solid transfer talent. The guy that got out of West Virginia, Muhammad, I think it's Wag. I can't remember how to pronounce his name.
Yeah, he's young and athletic.
Big solid body. But you need to bring in these transfers to kind of keep continuity in terms of guys that know what the college level is all about. They're not going to take nearly as much time to adjust to a scheme as some of the freshmen that they're bringing in this season. I've gotten to see Jaron Stevenson a little bit. Real like I think you hit the nail on the head there, Rich, with like the comparison to Clowney. Probably best fit as sort of a power forward, little bit of skill with the ball, but I think physically he's going to struggle at times with the sort of SEC kind of bruiser style play. But I think the talent that they're bringing in, this team is going to be solid, at least in SEC play. I'd be pretty shocked to see if they don't end up making a tournament run.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely not as good as last year, but certainly there's plenty of talent for them to be very competitive. All right, we're going to move on to Texas A&M, and some people might say, well, how did Texas A&M finish right behind Alabama in the conference? And Alabama was a 1 seed, and they were a 7th. Well, quite frankly, this team got off to a horrible start last year. I can remember watching them in an early game in October or November, or excuse me, it was definitely a November game. I was like, oh my God, this team doesn't know what it's doing. It's just, but they quickly turned that around, especially in conference play. So, and they don't lose a lot. They lost Dexter Dennis. He's on a 2-way in the NBA, and they lost Aaron Gordon, who's been a combo guard for them. He's still in the portal, actually. But they bring back Wade Taylor, and Taylor is the conference's leading returner for scoring at 16.3 points per game, 173 throws made. He's the leader in that department, and he shot 88% from the free throw line. This guy gets to the line a ton. Also, the conference's leading returner for usage percentage at 29.6, and the leading returner in plus minus at 10. He is joined by in the backcourt by Tyrese Radford, who's just a blue collar guy, and he's seemingly been around forever. He started off at Virginia Tech. Henry Coleman and Julius Marble come back. They're big guys up front, among others. Pretty much, this is very similar to last year's team. They brought in some 3-star recruits, so that wasn't overly exciting. I think the most interesting newcomer coming in, and will probably slot right in the Dexter Dennis's role, and that's Jace Carter from Illinois Chicago. He had a super impressive freshman season. Last year, all his numbers dipped. I don't know if he was hurt or whatever, but I still think this kid has a lot of potential, and he's just a junior. So what do you make of A&M?
Yeah, Rich, I'm a big fan of Buzz Williams. I've always been a Buzz Williams guy. I like the more high speed, defense to offense sort of oriented college teams and college coaches. And A&M's been solid the past few years with Buzz. The recruiting hasn't quite been up to par in recent years. But I mean, this team has continuity. I'm a big fan of Henry Coleman, a nice little athletic kind of bowling ball type guy as power forward for them. Bringing back Wade Taylor is going to be great. You want to see the usage rate drop a little bit. I think, being so dependent on your point guard is maybe not like a recipe for high level success. In NCAA. Looking at Jace Carter, bringing him in, a nice versatile wing. He's a really good rebounder, for a guy that spends so much time on the perimeter. He was over 7 rebounds per game last season. That fits into the Buzz Williams style play. I think the question is going to be shooting for them. I think that was a big part of why Taylor had such a high usage rate last year, was he was one of the few guys that could shoot consistently for them.
Yeah.
Defensively, they're really, really solid, very much fit into, the length of the SEC. But if they can't increase their shooting this season, they're going to struggle, at least offensively. But I think, with the returning guys, with the depth that they have in their front court, they're going to be a solid contender SEC play. I think you could see them maybe being one of the lower entrants into March Madness come the end of the season. But always a team that's very competitive, especially SEC tournament play. They sort of punch above their weight in terms of talent, but they should be a very good team this year.
Yeah, they need to find shooting somewhere. And if they do, this team could win the conference. But if they don't, they're probably, they'll still probably be toward the top, in my opinion. But I just can't love this team in March if they can't shoot better than they did last year, which was 33% from deep. All right, we're moving on to Kentucky, and usually, or for the last couple of years, Kentucky's actually had a little bit of continuity, a lot of, specifically with Oscar Tshiebwe, but now he's moved on to the NBA. So did Cason Wallace, Jacob Toppin, Severe Wheeler transferred to Washington. Chris Livingston moved on to the NBA. C.J. Frederick transferred to Cincinnati, Lance Ware transferred to Villanova, and Damian Collins transferred to LSU. That's a lot of talent going out the door. Now, who do they have back? They have Uganya Onyenso, their athletic center, excellent shot blocker, but he's been hurt most of the preseason, or if not all, and he's not going to be ready for the start of the season. They bring back sixth man of the year, actually co-sixth man of the year, Antonio Reeves. Good shooter, and Adu Thiero, who didn't play a ton either, but I was always impressed when he was on the court. And of course, they bring in one significant transfer in Trey Mitchell from West Virginia, power forward, former top 100 guy, and he will give them some help, somewhat replace Tshiebwe. And then it's just a recruiting class that features, the incoming freshman has seven top 200 recruits, and one highly regarded international prospect. And of those seven coming from the United States, 4 are 5 stars and 1 is a 4-star. So, and headlined by, Justin Edwards, small forward, DJ Wagner, combo guard, Aaron Bradshaw, and I must say, and I should mention also point guard, Rob Dillingham. All those guys are top 20 guys. Bradshaw's been hurt, and he hasn't really played in the offseason or preseason. And the international guy they're bringing in, Ivanimir Ivicic, he played in the Adriatic League last year, but he still hasn't been given a waiver by the NCAA, which often happens with these guys who have played professional ball. They got to make sure, they're not professionals. This happened with Kentucky, actually had.
It happened with Enes Kanter.
Right, Kanter. That's who I was trying to think of. Right. Now, Kanter actually ended up just moving. Did he ever play for Kentucky? I don't think he did.
I don't think he did, actually. Right. I think he hung out. He was in the building, but he didn't actually play.
Right. So what's interesting is the team's top 3 centers are all out right now, and they haven't been available over the summer or the preseason. So that's interesting. But, basically, this team is going to have to be starting, I would think, at least 2 freshmen. Who knows? They might start 4 freshmen.
Yeah, this team is going to go as far as this freshman class can take them. Especially with so many guys. I think my big worry, and I think this is always kind of the worry with a, sort of a more traditional Calipari, freshman-oriented Kentucky team, is where does the defense come from? Mm-hmm. Even Bradshaw, Aaron Bradshaw is much more of an offensively build type of center. He can really space the floor. He's pretty twitchy off the bounce, but he's not thick. He's pretty skinny for a 7-footer. If they don't have a Visage there to shore up the center position behind Bradshaw, mm-hmm. There's a lot of ball handling. not necessarily a whole lot of playmaking from this guard core as well. DJ Wagner, very much a combo guard. He can play make a little bit, but I think he's best sort of slashing to the basket, attacking in pick and roll situations. You've got Rob Dillingham behind him, who's kind of in the Bones Highland school of let me dribble, shoot, and score on you. I think Justin Edwards is the guy to have circled for this team. If he comes out and looks, even a little bit the part of, a Brandon Miller from last season in terms of a freshman that comes in and is just immediately ready for the spotlight, I think this team could be really good. But that being said, like with the talent in the door, I don't see like the ceiling, or I don't see the floor being very low for this Kentucky team. In past years when they've had really freshman-oriented squads, the floor was kind of like barely make it to the tournament. I feel like this is a solid SEC team, even with the question marks defensively. They can just put up a ton of offense. I mean, that's throw in a guy like Reed Shepherd, who's like just solid all around. I think this team is going to be very, very solid, very competitive in the SEC this year.
Yeah, everyone forgets about Onyensu, but man, that kid can block shots out of nowhere. But as I said, he's not healthy right now, and we're not sure when he's going to be ready. Now, he doesn't have much beef on him either. So, I mean, this is a team that ranked last year in terms of rebounding percentage. They were third in the country. Of course, that was a lot to do with Shigwe, and they don't have anybody as close to that kind of rebounder on this team. So, yeah. Did you happen to catch the article written about Calipari recently in The Athletic?
No, what did they talk about, Rich?
They talked about him losing it. That he's lost a lot of his support system over the years. He's kind of lost focus and is always kind of like bickering with the media, or even internally with the athletic director and the football coach. I don't know if you remember that last year. He got into it with the football coach there, and he's Stoops, one of the Stoops brothers. And yeah, I don't know. It wasn't very. It was interesting because they keep on saying, anytime somebody says something negative in the press or in public, the Calipari can't let it go and can't just move on. And boy, that article, if that's true, then this article he's not going to love, because it really didn't have a lot of positive things. They talked about his offense, being stale, old, outdated. Talked about him, blowing the opportunity to win a national championship. I mean, this team, basically, even with having a little continuity over the last few years, they've fallen into this pattern of they start slow, they heat up in the SEC play, they make the tournament, and then they're out in a round or two. And that's all she wrote, and but that's kind of, these guys have all the talent in the world, but they're all young and there's not much continuity, and they're starting off with injuries, all focused at one position, and their best player, that they're losing from last year played that position. So, I mean, it's not starting off well, but like I said, this team has all the talent in the world. All right, so we'll move down to Missouri, the next team we're going to talk about. And Missouri lost Kobe Brown, Cam's favorite player of all time, and Demoy Hodge, a great shooter. They also lost DeAndre Goldston, a wing. Isaiah Mosley, who didn't play much for them last year, is off to the G League. Who they bring back? Well, we'll start off with their leader in minutes, and that was Nick Honor. And he's the conference's leading returner for three-point shooting at 39.9%. on 3.9 attempts per game. Also, the conference's leading returner for points and assists per possession at 1.43. They also bring back Noah Carter, a small forward, Sean East, point guard, Aiden Shaw, who didn't play much last year as a freshman, but he was a 4-star guy. And then coming in from the portal, they got some nice pieces. Tamar Bates, former top 40 guy, Connor Vanover, who played at Arkansas, and Oral Roberts. Big, tall guy, can shoot a little, block some shots, just all arms and legs. John Tunji comes in from Colorado State. He's a nice all-around wing. Caleb Grill comes in from Iowa State, and he can shoot the lights out. He's streaky, though, and he can shoot you into a game or out of a game. The recruiting class features only one 4-star and a couple 3-stars. The 4-star is forward Trent Pierce at number 84 in the composite rankings. So Missouri, likes to run and gun, likes to play pressure defense, very much kind of like Marquette. What do you make of how the Tigers look this coming season?
Yeah, it's going to be refreshing. I mean, you mentioned Kobe Brown. He played a chunk of center for this team last year.
Right.
They play a very high pace. And I'm excited to see Connor Vanover sort of step into that sort of high-paced offensive attack.
Well, they played that way at Oral Roberts. So
yeah, exactly. You don't expect, a guy that's listed at about 7'5" to really thrive in a high-paced sort of offensive style. But that's really what his game's built for. He wants to get up and down. He wants to run the court. He's going to rebound outlet, and then put his chin on the rim. And I think that sort of center is perfect for the way that Missouri wants to play. But at the same time, I think a couple of guys that they have leaving, they're really going to miss. I mean, Brown, it goes without being said, they're going to miss his production. But I think Demoy Hodge is a really big loss for this team, and just the style play that they had last year. You like keeping a guy like Nick Honor in-house, really strong shooter. And not a guy that's going to wow you with his sort of ball handling skill. I think he's very much a strong game manager at the point guard position. I think Tonje is a really good addition as well for the way that I think he can replace some of that wing presence that they had last year with Brown. A little bit bigger guy, even though he's just 6'5". Plays a little bit inside outside, so I think he'll slot in really well as well. I wonder what the ceiling is for this team, though. I think last year they were really strong defensively, but I think they struggled on the offensive end at times. They were kind of hit or miss. If they couldn't get out and run against a team, they really struggled to score.
Yep.
I think they'll be a little bit better on that end this year. But I can't quite decide if I see them as a tournament team. It took a pretty miraculous run, last year for them to really make it. So I think, a very solid middle of the pack to good SEC team this year.
Yeah, I definitely think they're a bubble team for it's tournament time. When you look over this roster, you're like, who's going to lead this team in scoring? Is it going to be Bates? Going to be Vanover? Going to be Honor? Probably they're all going to be, they'll probably have 4 or 5 guys over 10 points per game, but nobody probably over 14 points a game. And I think Bates is probably the most talented player here on this team. But it really has taken him a long time to come around. But I not just because of a lack of star power and some lack of continuity. I mean, they basically lost about half of the players who played significant minutes last year. So, All right. So now we're going to bring up your alma mater, Tennessee. And they lose Olivia Kamwa, transferred to Michigan. Julian Phillips moved on to the NBA. Euros Placevic moved on to the pros, and he's playing for Mega BMAX, or just Mega, KK Mega, in the Adriatic League. He'll probably be one of the older players on that team, believe it or not, because Mega is kind of like Europe's G League Ignite. They always have all these young guys coming in from Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia. And they also lose Tyreek Key to the pros. He's also playing in Europe. And who comes back? A lot of good guys come back. Santiago Vescovi. He's the conference's leading returner for three-pointers made at 91, and he shot 37% from deep last year. If he doesn't have to handle the ball so much and can play off the ball, he can shoot better than 37%. He's also the conference's leading returner in win shares at 5.4. Josiah Jordan James, much to my surprise, because I was told he was definitely out of there by a friend of his brother's, but that didn't happen, and he's back. Zagai Ziegler is back, and he is the conference's leading returner for assists per game at 5.4, assist percentage, steals per game as well at 2.0. Now, of course, Zakai is still recovering from last year's injury, and I just inquired at Tennessee about his status, and they gave me the classic answer: it's day to day. I think it's probably going to be a while before we see Zakai, but I think we will see Zakai eventually. He got hurt at the end of February last year, so it's not close to a year yet. Then we have Jonas Adu, center returns, and he's the conference's leading returner in defensive rating. Also can shoot a little bit. He's trying to expand his game. We have Jemai Meshach coming back, combo guard, and he's the conference's leading returner in steal percentage. Toby Awaka comes back, a power forward who was very efficient in limited minutes last year, and DJ Jefferson, who redshirted last year, he was a 3-star. He is also back. And in the portal, they get two guys that should give some life to the offense, and Dalton Connect, a small forward from Northern Colorado, Jordan Gainey, a shooting guard from UC Upstate. And the recruiting class has 2 4-stars, and Cameron Carr, who's a shooting guard, and JP Estrella, who's a center. And they also have Cade Phillips, a 3-star power forward coming in. So what do you think of your alma mater?
Rich, I think Tennessee is by far the favorite to win the SEC this year. I mean, they've got everything. I mean, 2 returning sort of super seniors in Santiago Vescovi and Josiah Jordan James. They've been around. If you've watched Tennessee, you know what those guys kind of bring to the game. James is a really strong defensive wing, can do a little bit of everything offensively, kind of he's kind of a master of none on that end, but if you need to throw it to him and get a bucket, you can rely on him for that. People, your last memory was, Tennessee falling short to Florida Atlantic. Of course, they did that without Ziegler. Zakai Ziegler is like just a pint-sized sort of demon offensively. And like really like you expect, an undersized guard like Ziegler to be a negative defensively, but I think, Tennessee might actually be better with him on the court. He's so stocky, so strong, so quick. He's so adept at getting into passing lanes. Once he gets back, this team's going to take a step up. I love Jonas Adu, Jemai Meshach, just like the definition of like a Rick Barnes pair of players. Meshach really struggles to bring a whole lot offensively at times. He's really struggled with the jump shot, but absolutely one of the best on-ball defenders on the wing in the SEC. Adu, I'm so excited to see sort of step into a full-time center position. Hopefully he'll be starting pretty regularly. He really starred at times in the tournament last season behind Plavsic. But he's much more mobile. than Plavsic was for this team last year. Much more versatile on the offensive end. So I think his hopes at, maybe sneaking into NBA sort of contention have raised this year.
Yeah,
But
no,
this team's
definitely.
got that's just the returning players. I mean, they have so much continuity. I love Dalton Connect. I think, if you got a chance to see the Michigan State game, he looked like a star at times for this Tennessee team. Brings a ton on the offensive end in terms of his shooting, but also his finishing at the rim. Just another guy that can handle the ball for this team as well if need be. I absolutely love Jordan Gainey's shooting. He replaces Tyreek Key's offense very well. But with additional shooting, I think in
Yeah,
past years, this team's really struggled if Vescovi's off the court. And they won't have this problem anymore. I
he
think
was
Gainey
very
is
much
an
into
absolute bomber.
he was very much into taking the mid-range shots. And where this team they didn't need more mid-range shooters. They needed some shooters from deep. So
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think Connect and Gainey bring that.
Yeah, they totally do. And if you haven't gotten a chance to see Cameron Carr, this incoming freshman, this guy can shoot the absolute skin off of the ball. I mean, I really love his game. I've seen people compare him to like a Reggie Miller, but
Wow.
he's a little bit longer, a little more athletic than you would, kind of make that comparison. I think, he may not make an impact immediately, but I think you're going to see him creep into the lineup sooner rather than later because he can, like what I've seen of him film wise, he can really defend and he is a vertical threat, but the shooting is big time. He's a real NBA level shooter.
And do you
And I don't know how much JP Estrella will see, but should become like over time a really solid center backup. And I think Tennessee, like with the additions, with the returning guys, this is by far the deepest team, maybe in all of college basketball.
by
What
the
do you
way,
think, though, Rich?
Cameron Carr is the reason why you lost your UT email address because they have a rule they can only have so many Camerons in their email list. So he bumped you out. But
He took it.
here's my concern. But I don't know I don't think it's a big concern. Kamwa, Phillips, and Plazovic brought a lot of defense, brought a lot of physicality, and I don't see this team being nearly as physical and defensive oriented, though they do have some excellent defensive players on the perimeter. Adu is a little bit on the slight side, but Awaka is very physical. So I think they're going to lose a little bit on the defensive end, especially on the interior. But I think this team's going to be much better offensively, and that's what the ordered.
Yeah, Rich, I think I disagree with you a little bit on Plavsic. I think this team I think just to get more size on the court, they would kind of sacrifice some speed and athleticism defensively, which Adu has. I think he looks a little when you watch him play, he seems a little bit creaky, like he can't move side to side very quickly. But up and down, he's very athletic, very quick, excellent shot blocker. I think that's an improvement for them personally. I would have liked to see Adu play more than Plavsic last year. I think I mean if they brought back Nkamwa, I mean we're talking like I feel like clear favorites to win the whole thing.
Right.
I think Nkamwa like could bring a little bit of everything offensively if you needed him to. I mean his shooting numbers weren't great, but defensively he was excellent.
Right.
But I think they've got enough defensively. I think Meshack is a stopper, and you need a guy that's going to stop those combo guards. He fills into that role very well. Josiah Jordan-James can take a lot of the sort of power forward, small forward wing type guys. And if you've got Adu in the middle, I don't think this team's going to take a step back defensively, at least not much of a large one.
Well, I guess, I think sometimes Tennessee won some games before the first half was even over because they just intimidated the shit out of the opponent. Plavich, would go around just beating up the opposing players, and of course Meshack is big and strong, and Awaka's big and strong, and I just feel, and Phillips was a great on-ball defender. I think, but I think this team's going to be better than last year because we always would make Tennessee jokes about them not being able to score. So I don't think we're going to be able to do that this year, All right, so we'll move on to
They
Vanderbilt.
got it this year.
We'll move on to Vanderbilt. And, this situation in Vanderbilt with Jerry Stackhouse is starting to remind me of Patrick Ewing in Georgetown. And I say that because he always seems to bring in a decent recruiting class and decent players from the portal. But for all the players he brings in, the same number just go right out the door. And it's good players too. So this year, they lose the defensive player of the year, Liam Robbins, to the pros. There's nothing could have been done about that. But they also lose Miles Studi, a wing, to South Carolina, Jordan Wright, another wing, moved on to LSU. And they do bring back one really key player from last year, two, actually, their backcourt. Trin Lawrence, a shooting guard who tested the NBA waters in the offseason, and Ezra Manjan, their point guard. And also they bring back like three sophomores that really didn't play much last year, in Lee Dort, Colin Smith, and Paul Lewis. Coming in from the portal, their best prize is Van Allen Lubin, a power forward from Notre Dame, former four-star. I thought was very impressive in limited play at Notre Dame last year. Was sad to see him go as an Irish fan, and I think he'll be a nice piece. And the recruiting class includes 4 top 200 guys, but all of them are between 169 and 179 in the composite rankings, meaning they're all 3 stars. So I don't know if I see much to this Vanderbilt team beside, Mannion, Lawrence, and Van Allen Lubin.
Yeah, Rich, I'm not a fan of the Vanderbilt team this year. I feel like they're dependent on their shooting stretches. I think that was a big part of why they had the sort of stretch run that they had last season.
Yeah.
They kind of got hot. They're playing well from the wing, but they don't have a lot on the interior. I think Lubin is really about it.
And he's if they play him his center, he's undersized for that.
Yeah, but I don't think you love Lee Dort either at center for this team. I think he's a serviceable option, but not somebody that you're like in love with, running the show. I don't see a whole lot from these Stackhouse teams. Like, they're kind of blah in every facet of the game. Like, they'll have a stretch where they're a really solid defense, and then they'll fall back off, and they'll have a stretch where they shoot really, really well, and that kind of carries their other weaknesses. I think one of the things that he's really struggled to recruit on is like finding some actually like high level athletic guys. They play pretty low to the ground.
Right.
They're really reliant on movement offensively. I would really, I think this team's going to really struggle this year. They've got the continuity in the backcourt, which is going to help carry them a little bit. We're not talking like a South Carolina sort of situation from last year where they just can't get any wins, but they're going to be stuck, in the lower end of the middle of the pack.
But here's the thing. They end the season on an 11-3 run, all right, including winning 2 games in the NIT. They just, they were right on the bubble for the NCAA tournament. They could have run it back with everybody except for Robbins, and who, admittedly, defensive player of the year, but that would have been the main piece that they would have had to replace. And half of the team left, and not a lot coming in. I actually think this team's last place. So next up is Auburn. They were kind of on the bubble too last year, and they lose some good players from last year's squad. Wendell Green has moved on to the G League. Alan Flanagan, wing, transferred to Ole Miss. Zeb Jasper, a point guard, graduated. Johan Traore moved on to Santa Barbara, and Chance Westry moved on to Syracuse. Those last two players were their two prize recruits, by the way, from last season. But they do bring back some nice players. Janiah Broom, he's the conference's leading returner in blocks per game at 2.4 and block percentage at 9.6. Jalen Williams, kind of an all-around forward, can play some center, probably even play some small forward for you if you wanted to. He's back. Dylan Caldwell, their big center, is back. Katie Johnson is back at point guard. Also, Trey Donaldson's back at point guard. Chris Moore is back at forward. They only bring in two significant players, but they're very good players. Denver Jones from Florida International pretty much figures to start right away from this team, give them a shooting guard who can actually shoot, which is needed on this team. And, of course, Aiden Holloway, a five-star guy, point guard, number 18 in the composite rankings. He's a typical Auburn point guard in that he's undersized. Bruce Pearl really loves his little point guards, and he joins. But Denver Jones will bring a little more size to the backcourt. So, what do you make of Auburn?
Yeah, I mean, you got to think this team is pretty comfortably, going to be, one of the top SEC teams. I think they have so much, and pretty classically for a Bruce Pearl team, they have so much depth in the wings, especially at guard. Like you said, he loves his small guards. Of them, I feel like Aiden Holloway is probably the best. And maybe not going to start immediately from day one, but will become the starter sooner rather than later. Kind of I think he's a little bit more in the score first sort of vein than like past Auburn point guards have been.
Well, I mean, Wendell Green was pretty much score first, and Katie Johnson is score first. So.
Yeah, but I'm thinking more along the lines of like their NBA prospect guys that have been on the borderline. I think of
like when they went to the Final Four. Right, when they went to the Final Four, Harper was a pass first guy.
Yep, I think Holloway can moonlight as sort of the pass first sort of point guard, but he's at his best sort of jacking up kind of silly shots, really, like kind of more like a Trae Young type of point guard. That's kind of where he fits in. And of course you got Denver Jones too. I mean, a little bit bigger guard, but I would consider him more of a combo guard even than a shooting guard. Can definitely handle the ball. Big thing is like they're bringing back most of their front court. I think Flanagan, you could argue, was a big part of their front court, even though he does play mostly at the wing. But Janiah Broom is the defensive center of this team. As long as they've got him shoring up the rebounding and rim protection side of things, I think they're going to be a above average, SEC team. I'm not sure if they're like, world beaters like they have been in past years in the SEC, but pretty much a shoe-in for March Madness in my mind. But what do you think, Rich?
No, I agree. Shooting is what this team needs. 31.5% last year. They gotta improve on that. Wendell Green was a chucker, so hopefully Denver Jones and Holloway, can shoot better, and this team could be in great shape. With good guard play and also some really true bigs to play in the front court. All right, so we move on to Florida, and Florida loses a lot, including their best player, Carl Castleton, signed a two-way with the Lakers. Alex Fudge moves on to the NBA, two-way with the Lakers. Kyle Lofton moved on to the pros. Myron Jones moved on to the pros. Kawasi Reeves moved on to Georgia Tech. And they lost a couple other players too. Who comes back? Ryan Kugel, shooting guard, was a freshman last year, has a lot of potential as an NBA player, really good shooting guard. They also bring back Will Richard, kind of a stat stuffing, kind of a wing. He's the conference's leading returner, by the way, in points per possession last year, 1.16, beating guys like Broom, which is kind of impressive. And they really, really hit the portal hard and brought in some really players that are not super well known, but highly productive and should be also that, and they should translate to the SEC. Now I'm talking about combo guard Walter Clayton from Iona, Micah Handlotten, who's big 7-footer, and he had a very impressive freshman season last year from Marshall. Also bring in Trace Samuel from a power forward from Seton Hall, can give you minutes at center. Zion Pullian was tested the NBA waters. He's a point guard who can also light up the scoreboard. From UC Riverside, EJ Jarvis from Yale, a very productive player from Yale. And then the freshman class includes Alex Condon, a center from the NBA Global Academy. So a lot of nice pieces here. I will say that Jarvis right now just recently left the team for personal reasons, and I don't know if he intends to come back. Usually they do. If not, it's kind of more definitive, saying it was kind of more like it seemed like he was more saying, I'm taking a break, not leaving the team permanently. And Pullen, as far as I know, has yet to receive a waiver from the NCAA as a multiple time transfer. So that could hurt this team. I don't think Jarvis and Pullen were going to start for this team. Maybe, but probably not. It definitely will hurt their depth if those two guys aren't around.
Yeah, I think one of the guys that I've heard a lot about is Condon out of I believe he's Australian, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Real like big body center, but he likes to run the court. I think I really like what I've seen out of him, and I think bringing in him as well as Handlotten, that's going to shore up their center position. I feel like you have to start, with the bigs in SEC play and work out from there. I feel like they'll be solid on the interior. They've got the shooting with Riley Kugel. I still wonder like what the ceiling is for this team. I really look at them, kind of in the Mississippi State from last season sort of vein. Like, they could be, sort of a bubble team. They could be on the outside looking in. They could be the last team in from the SEC. I think it comes down to how well the incoming talent gels, and like you said, Rich, like who can actually report and play minutes for them.
Yeah. I think Kugel, Richard, and Clayton is tremendous backcourt. I think it's going to be a tremendous backcourt. Whether the young guys can take over at center. I mean, Samuel has always been like an underachiever at Seton Hall, and he's got a lot of athleticism and can stretch the floor, but he's never quite put it all together. Jarvis is more of a defensive type of guy, but the bigs are there, but we got to see what happens with these situations with Jarvis and Pullen. But, if everybody's there, this kind of looks like a tournament team, but if everybody's not, maybe not. All right, then we'll talk about the Mississippi State, who you just mentioned. They don't lose a lot from last year's squad. Now, they just got into the NCAAs last year, and they bring back Tula Smith, who's the conference's leading returning rebounder at 8.5 per game. Also, the conference's leading returner and player efficiency rating at 27.5. They bring in Cam Matthews, who's a versatile forward, really good defender, scrappy blue-collar guy, makes all kinds of winning plays. DJ Jeffries, former high recruit from Memphis, still struggles on the offensive end. Shaquille Moore, little combo guard, comes back. And from the portal, they're not bringing in really a lot. They're bringing in Andrew Taylor, who's a solid point guard from Marshall, and Jimmy Bell, again, solid center from West Virginia, but nothing to get overly excited about. And then their one significant recruit was Josh Hubbard, top 100 guy, point guard. So what do you make of Mississippi State? This team was dreadful offensively last year. And I forgot to mention Tula Smith is probably going to be out till at least late December with an injury that he suffered not too long ago. And of course, he was their top returning player.
Yeah, Rich, I mean, people around the country have made this argument, but I don't feel like Mississippi State should have made the tournament last year to begin with.
Right. I was among that. I thought Vanderbilt, for one, or Rutgers, another one, teams that should have gotten in.
Or Clemson. Clemson would have been a great team to throw into the mix.
Right, yeah.
This is kind of your classic, let's throw as many big bodies as we can onto the court at once and win the game based on rebounding and defense.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked decently well for them last season. I mean, they were middle of the pack in the SEC. They were pretty dreadful in the tournament. I feel like a lot of their season really comes down to Josh Hubbard. I've seen, some people are really high on him. If you don't know a whole lot about him, he's a very small guard. He's like 5'10", but just kind of a little bit of a wizard with the ball in his hands. Very, very quality pick and roll player. I've seen some people that are extremely high on him. But again, a small point guard in the SEC, you have to worry a little bit about the possible output. But I mean, this team needs shooting desperately.
Mm.
They couldn't hit the side of a barn last year.
Nope.
I think out of any team I've ever watched, this team hit the side of the backboard more than any basketball team I've ever witnessed. And like you said, with Tulu Smith, like if he's not playing, significant minutes for them, that's a big issue. I mean, he's like the definition of throw a couple of big guys on the court and let them dominate the boards and play defense. Like,
right,
that's what he does, and that he was sort of the defining player for this team last year. If they don't have him, they could be back down towards the bottom of the conference pretty easily. Wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, they started off the season really well because they had a really weak out-of-conference schedule. I don't know if they can do the same this year because they're not going to have their best player. And then as the schedule got tougher, that's when the losses started coming in. And how bad were they shooting last year? 26.6% from deep, the absolute worst in Division I. That's 365 teams, I believe. So they were 365th in the country. All right, we'll move on to Arkansas. Arkansas finished, as you can see, we're getting to them just now. We're way down in the conference, but they made it all the way to the Sweet 16. They were a very young club last year, and so it took them a while to get things together. And so many guys, 4 of them to be exact, moved on to the NBA. Anthony Black, Ricky Council, Nick Smith Jr., and Jordan Walsh. They also lose Mikhail Mitchell to Little Rock, and Barry Dunning transferred to UAB. Dunning didn't play much, but he was a former high recruit. Makai Mitchell returns for Arkansas, so their 2 twins have split up. And Makai actually is the conference's leading returner for effective field goal percentage at 66.6% and offensive rating, believe it or not. You don't consider him an offensive player. That's 128.1 was his offensive rating. Of course, that is due to his high efficiency with his field goal percentage. Also returning, Trevin Brazil, who got off to a great start last year, played about 10 games, looked awesome, and then he got injured. He is coming back and should be ready for the start of the season. Devontae Davis, Devo Davis, as he's known, great little combo guard, kind of the heart and soul of this team. He is back. And then they bring a crap load of guys in from the portal, including most of them are guard types. Got Trayvon Mark, a wing coming in from Houston. Khalif Battle, a chucker, shooting guard from Temple. L. Ellis, another chucker, a combo guard from Louisville who led that team in both scoring and assists. Got Chandler Lawson, power forward coming in from Memphis. Jemiah Davenport, a wing coming in from Cincinnati. And point guard Kenyon Middlefield coming in from Washington. They also have 2 top 40 recruits on this team. Bayfall, a center, and Layden Blocker, a point guard. So Arkansas's got a fair amount of continuity and a bunch of new guys.
Yeah, I think I the number one thing for me is I'm really excited to see a second round of Trevon Brazil. I think, he started out the season so so fun last year, and to watch it kind of fall apart on him so quickly, into the season, it was pretty depressing. I feel like that team could have been, another step up if they had him.
Oh yeah.
I think getting to see him in year 2 is gonna be entertaining at the very least. And then they're bringing back some solid guys. You mentioned Devo, you mentioned Makai. That you need that kind of returning talent to really, shine in the SEC. You also mentioned all of the chuckers that they are bringing in. I think collectively, they can match the chuckerism that was Nick Smith and Ricky Council for a stretch of the year last year.
Mm-hmm.
You need guys to take shots. They're going to take plenty of them. But I think the guy that I really have circled is Layden Blocker. I've gotten to watch him a little bit, preparing for the pod today, and I really, really like what he brings at the point guard position. I think that's a guy that, this team just doesn't really have.
No, not a true point guard. I mean, right.
Yeah. I think that's really what Blocker is. I think I wouldn't say he's really like a game manager, or a distributor, but on the defensive end, he's going to take up that, primary point guard defensive role. He's about 6'2", a little bit higher on the athletic side than sort of your average point guard. Decent jumper. Might take him a little bit of time to space all the way out to the 3. But I think, he's the guy that you have to have circled to kind of assess how far this Arkansas team can go. I'm pretty comfortable with them as like my number 2 in the SEC this year, probably behind Tennessee. We'll get into those kind of predictions in a little bit, but I'm a big fan of this Arkansas team.
Yeah. And we know Musselman, excels at bringing together a bunch of new faces and making it work. He did it in Nevada. He's done it here. I mean, last year he had 4, 5-star like freshmen come in and he made it work. So I think this team's really good shape. I think 2nd or 3rd in the conference is what they should be looking at. All right, so we'll move down to Georgia, and Mike White is kind of rebuilding this team. Didn't have a ton of talent last year. Terry Roberts was a nice point guard. He's moved on to the G League. Kario Okendo was a very athletic shooting guard who couldn't shoot, moves on to Oregon. They also lost some guys that didn't necessarily play a lot of minutes, but were former high recruits like in Kai Lindsey and Jason Holt. They're all gone. And not a lot of exciting pieces return. I'd say the 3 best players would be point guard Justin Hill, Jabari Abdul-Rahim, a small forward, started off with Virginia. Also Matthew Alexander Moncrief, you might remember him from Oklahoma State. They were all there last year. None of them did exceptionally well. So what comes in? A bunch of new guys from the portal and a nice recruiting class. And I guess I'll start there because really, they bring in 4 freshmen that are ranked between 70 and 110 in the composite rankings. So you're talking about all 4 stars, lower ranked 4 stars. They're kind of at the lower end of the 4-star, but they have shooting guard Blue Kane, Dylan James, a power forward, Silas DeMary, a combo guard, and Mary Jordan, a wing. So they will join RJ Melendez, he's my kind of player. I always like the all around stat sheet stuff. God, give me another drink. Stat sheet stuffing guys. Melendez is kind of like a versatile, scrappy guy coming in from Illinois. And he probably the leader of the recruiting class. They also bring in Jalen Deloach, a power forward from VCU, will add some much needed shot blocking to this team. So yeah, that's where Georgia's at. Looks like they're in a full rebuild mode.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, Rich. I mean, it's we don't really talk about it a lot in terms of, rebuilding teams in college basketball, but this is definitely a case of that. They've had some recent NBA talent. You got to mention a guy like Anthony Edwards, but even with the heights of how Georgia can recruit, I feel like this is a basketball program that should be like a sleeping giant, but they've never really built a program to begin with. It's
right. Yeah,
they're just constantly replacing, the last coach who underperformed.
They even stunk when they had Edwards.
They did, yeah.
I don't think this team's been
good.
I don't think this team's been really good since Dominique was there. I think that's the last time they were any good. Dominique Wilkins.
That was the 70s?
Yeah.
Late 70s,
yeah.
Early 80s.
Yeah. I mean, Dominique was probably early 80s because he was a contemporary of MJ. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it blows my mind, honestly, because Georgia is such a great recruiting base for basketball.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Atlanta area is only getting better. I mean, I grew up playing down there, going to AAU tournaments and being in that kind of scene. It's crazy. Like the talent is huge. Anthony Edwards was an Atlanta guy. But I mean, year after year, you see these guys leave Georgia and go somewhere else. I don't understand why they aren't staying in Athens. I think, Mike White's starting to get the ball rolling with a little bit more all-around recruiting class. This year, bringing in Blue Kane, Dylan James. Those are probably the 2 guys in my mind that are going to be, perennial sort of guys for this team going forward. But I don't know. I still feel like this is one of the bottom teams in the SEC.
Yeah.
I don't see that changing anytime soon, but
maybe next year. These guys with the year experience, I don't think any of them are jumping to the NBA. So yeah.
I think this is the start of something for Georgia. Hopefully. I mean, it genuinely blows my mind that this sort of franchise hasn't been a continuing threat in men's college basketball.
I hear you. All right. So speaking of, did we talk about bad teams? Well, we're going to talk about one now. And I can't believe South Carolina is not last on our list. Somehow they avoided the basement in this conference. I could go through the statistics where they were just absolutely horrible. But let's just start off. They were last in the conference in offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency. But they somehow avoided last place. Now they lose G.G. Jackson, who had an up and down freshman season. Of course, he was a very young freshman. He moves on to the NBA. Chico Carter was a nice shooting guard for them as well. He moves on to DePaul. Who comes back? Michi Johnson at point guard, Jacoby Wright at combo guard, and Zachary Davis at wing. And I like Zachary Davis. Not many people talk about him because he doesn't have much of an offensive game. But, man, this guy gets right into your jersey when he plays defense. He's a guy to keep an eye on as moving through the future. They also bring back center Josh Gray, and he's the conference's leading returner for rebounding percentage at 22%. They have a solid class coming in from the portal. Talon Cooper, a point guard from Minnesota, BJ Mack, power forward from Wolford, and Miles Studi, who we just talked about a little bit before, Vanderbilt, comes in. So, and they also have one 4-star recruit, albeit a high 4-star, I should say low 4-star, and Colin Murphy Boyles, number 90 in the composite rankings. He's a power forward. I think personally, South Carolina, even though they lost Gigi Jackson, I think they have more of a semblance of a team this year, and I don't expect anything great from them, but I think they'll play better basketball.
I gotta disagree with you, Rich, but I think this team sucks. They sucked last year. They're gonna suck even more this year. But I will tell you, I can't wait for the Michi Johnson show. I love watching that guy play. It's ridiculous the things that he attempts on the court and doesn't get pulled for trying. It's like, I love watching him jack shots, and I think that's going to be a solid part of their offense this season.
Well, I like
Cooper. Big dose last year.
I like Talon Cooper from Minnesota. I mean, he's not a great player, but he's a good college player, and maybe he'll bring some. I'm thinking he's going to bring some stability and consistency to this team. BJ Mack, he's not a pro, probably. Not an NBA pro. He'll play in Europe. But he's a great rebounder, shot blocker, interior presence. I don't know. I just think some pieces are here to have more of a semblance of a basketball team.
I mean, they had that last year. They could have been better last season. But I personally feel like the schemes that they had put in place, they just didn't have a whole lot from the coaching staff in terms of order. And with I think this is a big part of college basketball as well. When you're returning a lot of guys from a bad system, it's hard to change it. It's hard to it's hard to right the ship.
I think that's why we were talking about why Pitino cleaned house in St. John's when he had a handful of really good players there, but he just nope, you're not coming here. Just go somewhere else. And they did. A lot of those guys were snatched up like that because they're good players, but Pitino didn't want them back.
Yeah, I think you have to find guys that fit your system. And, I think in South Carolina's case, when there wasn't a system to begin with, it's hard to put one in place. Or you're not putting Michi Johnson in a box. I'm sorry. He's gonna play the way Michi Johnson plays.
Right.
And I really that goes for all the guys that they're returning. They just kind of rolled the ball out, maybe threw it to GG once in a while, maybe set a screen here and there. But other than that, they're just throwing the ball at the hoop and hoping it went in.
Right.
That was how they were playing that base level of basketball. I don't see any reason that should change this year. I don't see any reason that the defense will improve. They're just going to be a continuation of meh from last season.
All right. Fair enough. And Gamecock fans, you can send your fan mail to Cam at admin@hoopsprospects.com.
Enjoy your Super Bowl.
All righty. So now I'm going to talk about a team that I know is moving up, and they finished behind South Carolina in the standings, and that's Ole Miss. Ole Miss loses some nice pieces in wing Miles Burns, Amari Abram to Georgia Tech, and Deshaun Ruffin to Jackson State. That was a nice backcourt right there. But they also bring back Matthew Morrell, ultra athletic Matthew Morrell, who tested the NBA waters last year. Jeremy Brakefield, forward, combo forward. He was their most productive player last year, and he is back as well. And then they raided the portal, and they made some big splashes. Musa Cisse, huge shot blocker from Oklahoma State, and they also bring in a bigger shot blocker in Jamarian Sharp from Western Kentucky. Brandon Murray, a very athletic wing from Georgetown, NBA upside there. Alan Flanagan, a steady wing from Auburn, comes in. Austin Nunez, a little point guard from Arizona State, didn't get a ton of playing time last year. He is probably going to be running the show. They also bring in 2 3-stars and Rashad Marshall, who's a power forward center, and Cameron Barnes, another power forward. One thing I should say is Cisse and Murray have yet to get their transfer waivers cleared by the NCAAs. A lot of these guys you'll actually see have been denied, but then there's an appeal process. So, for example, the only one I know or only a few I know have been denied officially. Their appeal was denied, and one of them was Demario Williams from Memphis, who just actually turned 27 years old. But that's a huge loss for Memphis. But yeah. So, but as far as I know, there's still a chance Murray and Cisse could play. What do you think, Cam?
Yeah, I mean, they were one of the bottom tier teams in the SEC last season. I think, I would say kind of an example of, what happens when you kind of have to see through a team that has lost most of its talent. A very large class of guys either transferring or graduating, and mostly graduating. And a hell of a way to start fresh, and really like continue on with a veteran team. I'm a huge Jamarion Sharp fan. I think in SEC play, he fits just perfectly into like really like the way that the SEC is built. That sort of throwback game. And like for a guy his size, I love the way that he moves.
Yeah.
I think if you're like gonna compare him to like a Taco Fall, like that's kind of like the one guy that you could find to kind of compare him to in the last few years. Where you have this bigger guy, but they can still move. They're athletic, they're coordinated. I love him. Moussa Cisse, you mentioned him, great player, just a great all around rebounder, shot blocker, run the court, put your head on the rim. Excellent addition. And how the heck did this team end up with Alan Flanagan? Do you have any intel on this, Rich? Like how did they pry him away from Auburn?
This is his graduate year, right? I don't know. Auburn could actually use him because if you notice, when you look at Auburn's roster, they're all little guards and all guys like 6'10" and up. They have like very few players that are actually in that wing like status, so they could use him. But I don't know. Because it's not like Flanagan wouldn't play for Auburn this year. He certainly would.
Oh, he definitely would. Yeah. I really feel like Flanagan's like played a huge role for them, in past seasons. Like,
yeah, and don't be surprised if he doesn't play point guard for this team, because Nunez is a little guy, like about 6 foot. And if they want to go big, I mean, they already have bigs at the big positions. But I mean, if they, really there isn't a clear backup for Nunez on this team, I think Flanagan's going to move to point guard. Or maybe even start at point guard, and Nunez relieves him. But yeah,
you might be right there. What do you think though, Rich? I feel like Ole Miss is maybe a bubble team, maybe a step above a bubble team. Like, but I feel pretty confident about them in the SEC.
I think, with Sharp, Cisse is a luxury that you don't necessarily need, but I think Murray is critical. I mean, just think about the backcourt of Flanagan, Murray, and Rielhl, how athletic that team would be, and then you have Sharp backing them all up. It's going to be super tough to score in this team. But, I even think they can survive without Murray, but I think that really hurts their chances of, I think Ole Miss and Florida are going to be fighting for that 7th spot to get into the NCAA tournament. I think this conference only gets 7, and they're going to be the 2 teams fighting for it. All right, so let's move on to LSU, who somehow finished last in this conference. Matt McMahon's first season was kind of a disaster. He had some decent players, but they just didn't all gel. I don't think McMahon's ever been in a system where he had to put a bunch of new guys together. He was more of a building guy, and maybe we'll see some of that this year. But gone is their best player. KG Williams moves on to the pros. Cam Hayes, point guard, moves on to East Carolina. Adam Miller, shooting guard, moves on to Arizona State. Justice Hill moves on to Loyola Marymount. And Sean Phillips, center, moves on to Arizona State. Who do they bring back? Nobody super exciting, at least in terms of how they played last year. Some of the better returners are Derek Fountain, Trey Hannibal. Fountain, by the way, is a forward, Hannibal a guard. And also Tyrell Ward, who was a 4-star last year, didn't live up to that billing last year. And then through the portal, Damian Collins comes in from Kentucky. Jalen Cook, big-time scorer, comes in from Tulane. He's a point guard. Jordan Wright, steady player, comes in at small forward from Vandy as well. Will Baker, former high recruit, comes in, the center from Nevada. Nobody is going to, shooting guard Carlos Stewart comes in from Santa Clara. The freshmen coming in are nothing to be excited about, but and I will say, I don't know which transfer excites me more, Jalen Cook or Damian Collins. But unfortunately, Cook is one of those guys still waiting to get a waiver.
Yeah, you got Damian Collins coming in. I think, talk about a guy that was sort of, probably harmed by the continuity in Kentucky. He's a 6'9" forward, really athletic, long arms.
Yeah.
And a guy that I think is more comfortable playing kind of from a wing mindset than, sort of bruising. But he was competing with these massive bigs for most of his 2 years at Kentucky. He just really couldn't break into the lineup.
And he couldn't shoot, and Kentucky needed shooters,
Yeah.
So if he can be balanced out by shooters like Cook can shoot, and hopefully Ward can pick up his shooting from last year, and Stewart can shoot coming in from Santa Clara. I think he'll be much better off. And great athlete.
Yeah.
I
also, just to mention one of the freshmen, I've gotten a good look at Corey Chest. He's not polished by any means, but I think athletically and just like from a defensive versatility aspect, I think he'll probably be the guy to break into the rotation. If you're looking for a little bit younger spin, really nice in the transition game. Great slasher. Reminds me a tiny bit of some of like the best sort of forward prospects in recent years. Just like the way that he's not going to do it with his shooting, but his ball handling is there enough. He's strong enough. Like he's going to find a way to get to his floater game and his slashing attack. I think he could be a guy that breaks in. But this feels like a rebuilding year even then for me in LSU, so I don't have really high expectations for them this season.
Yeah. The only prediction I'm going to make is they won't finish in the basement. I think they're too talented to finish in the basement.
Yeah, but one of those teams that'll have like a 10-game stretch where they're, 2-8.
Yeah, they're going to take their lumps at times for sure. All right, so we've gone through all the teams. Now it's time for our predictions. I'm going to let you lead off, Cam. Which team wins this conference?
I think it's hands down Tennessee for me. That's not just me being a homer, but in the SEC, you need returning talent, you need continuity. The Vols have that in droves. Just to mention Ziegler, Josiah Jordan-James, Santiago Vescovi, throw in Adu, throw in Jemai Mashak. They've got so much continuity. Love what they did in the transfer portal with Connect and Gainey, bringing a little bit of offense with both of those two fellas. And, a really good pairing of, freshmen coming in. This is one of the best defensive rosters, historically in all of college basketball. And I don't see any reason that that's going to change this year. Even if they take a small step back, I mean, you're looking at like a team that holds opposing clubs to about 86 points per game. That's where they've been the past few years.
You don't, no, not 86.
They're not 86.
Huh? They were like 52.6.
Oh, Jesus, really?
Let's see.
God.
They held teams to 57.9, which was third in Division One.
I might have been looking at
their defensive efficiency. Their defensive efficiency was first in the nation, and that was 86.8.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
No, yeah, I agree. Oh. I agree. There was room to slide. There was room to slide because they were arguably the best defensive team in the country last year.
Yeah, I like if we talked about this with their preview, but if they improve the offensive efficiency in any way, they're automatically a more threatening team than the past, I would say probably 3 seasons of Tennessee basketball, because historically Rick Barnes teams, we've harped on it forever. The offense, I don't know if it's the offensive scheme. I don't know if it's a backwards idea of playing post-centric. I don't know what it is, but they go on stretches where they can't hit the side of the backboard. Mm-hmm. They're just an ugly offense to watch. No shooting, no spacing, no pick and roll offense at times. Like, I don't know. So that's to be seen, but so far in the preseason, they've already got a win against Michigan State. The offense looked better. Definitely some cold stretches, but you expect that at the beginning of the season. This team has so much talent. I think they're a shoe-in to win the SEC regular season. And, I think a pretty competitive pick for winning it all this year. I wouldn't be shocked to see them in the top 5. Seeds most of the year.
Yeah. I agree. Clear favorite to win the conference. And how far they can go after that, if Ziegler is closer to 100%, I think national championship is a real possibility. All right. So who else, beside we both picked Tennessee to win, who else makes it beside Tennessee?
Yeah, I'm looking at it, Rich, and I think we have the exact same picks.
Do we really?
I think we might. I'm gonna go with, obviously UT. I think Alabama, Arkansas, Kentucky will kind of be making up that next tier of teams, and then you got to throw in Texas A&M, Ole Miss. I think it's kind of like the last 2 out of the SEC. I think those are my bets. But what do you think, Rich? Give us.
I'm right there with you. I think Kentucky and Arkansas are going to be the 2 teams fighting for second place. I think Alabama, A&M, and Auburn are safely in the tournament. And I think this conference will get one more team. I'm saying Ole Miss right now, but as we noted, both Florida and Ole Miss have some players to get cleared. So right now my pick is Ole Miss. I think that team's going to be really hard to score on. But Florida could be that 7th team. I wouldn't be surprised if they got 8 bids like they did last year, but right now I see 7.
Yeah, I feel like, especially too, like the SEC as a whole is just kind of underperformed in March. In recent years, I think 7 is a pretty safe bet.
Right. All right. And then lastly, we're going to close up with our player of the year predictions. Who you got?
I think I'm going to go with Justin Edwards as my pick for Player of the Year. I just think, looking at his game, I think he's pretty clearly the highest recruit, really in the nation. Um, Probably the highest, definitely, I would say the highest on draft boards in college basketball right now. Um, he's a very streaky, or like a very lengthy, sorry, not streaky, I mean length. Very lanky, sort of left-handed scoring guard. Um, Reminds me a little bit of like a Chris Middleton, where
Mm.
like, he has some athletic flashes, but he really kills you in the mid-range with his shooting touch, with the jab steps and the step backs, and he very much fits into that sort of just a finesse game. And I love to see that in sort of a freshman prospect. That shows me that you know how to score efficiently. That shows me that you can, build as a playmaker throughout the year. I think, if you're looking at a freshman that can win the award this year, I think he's the guy. Um, I like the odds of a Grant Nelson bid. I think my worry with Nelson is it might take him a little bit of time to get used to the physicality, and he's not going to be able to bully his way to the rim quite as easily as he could at North Dakota State. But with the role that he's going to have in Alabama, I think they need his scoring, they need his athleticism, they need his rebounding. Like, he's going to put up some pretty serious numbers. But what do you think?
Well, first of all, I always work my way down, starting at who I think is going to win the conference, and so I think Zakai Ziegler and maybe one or two other Tennessee players might be in the mix, but I think they'll cancel each other out. I like Arkansas's Devo Davis, but I just don't know if he's going to be productive enough. He's not a super offensive player. Nelson, he's going to have to shoot better and cut down on his turnovers if he wants to make a run at the award, but I have him on the short list. Auburn's Janiah Broome, I think will be in the discussion. But to me, it comes down to Edwards, one of your picks, and Wade Taylor of A&M. And I'm going to call it the safer pick because he has experience in Taylor. But I think if Taylor can improve as a shooter, that will be one of the keys to not only A&M success, but also his personal, success in terms of winning this award and moving on to the NBA and all that good stuff. But yeah, that's my pick, Wade Taylor. All right. Well, that was we covered the SEC and we're wrapping up our conference previews, and we're going to wrap up this episode. As always, I want to thank our listeners. We didn't have a special guest this week, but we did have the NBA Notebook to replace the guest. So maybe we'll just make believe that we had a special guest in James Harden.
Gee, thanks, Rich.
To say goodbye. You're not a guest. You're a host. You're a regular host.
I'm definitely a special guest. 100% special guest. Right here.
Nas is a special guest. You're a regular host. You're like an employee. So
I'm a special guest wherever I go, Rich. You
even if it's camping. If you ever miss an episode, folks, you can always get caught up at hoopsprospects.com. We will be back next week. We're going to talk about our top 25, Hoops Prospects top 25. We're also going to go over our predictions for Final Four, the national champion, player of the year, freshman of the year, coach of the year. We're going to go over all that good stuff. I know we're going to be doing it about a week after the season tips off, but by then everybody's only going to have played one game. So, and most of these teams right now, none of the good teams are really playing each other. So yeah, we should be fine. What do you think? Any final words, Cameron?
Go Vols, baby. This is our year. This is the one.
I'm gonna have to actually go back and listen to last year's episode and see if you said the exact same words.
I definitely did not.
All right. I'll take your word on that. All right, so we'll just say goodnight, folks.